Welcome to the Book Show, a celebration of reading and writers. I'm Joe Donahue. In his new novel, Cold Victory, New York Times bestselling author Karl Marlantes delivers a sweeping tale of Cold War intrigue set in post-war Finland, in which loyalty, friendship, and love are put to the ultimate test. Helsinki, 1947. Finland teeters between the Soviet Union and the West. Everyone is being watched. A wrong look or a wrong word could end in catastrophe. Natalia Babrova from Russia and Louise Koski from the United States are young wives of their country's military attachés. When they meet at an embassy party, their husbands, Arnie and Mikhail, both world-class skiers, drunkenly challenge each other to a friendly but secret cross-country wilderness race. Karl Marlantes graduated from Yale University and was a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford before serving as a Marine in Vietnam, where he was awarded the Navy Cross, the Bronze Star, 2 Navy Commendation Medals for Valor, 2 Purple Hearts, and 10 Air Medals. He is the best-selling author of Matterhorn, What It Is Like to Go to War, and Deep River. Again, the new novel is Cold Victory, and it's a great pleasure to welcome Karl Marlantes to this week's book show. Karl, thank you very much for being with us. A delight to have you on the program.
Thank you very much for having me here.
I really enjoyed this novel. I was a huge fan of Matterhorn, and as well as Deep River. This is a very different book, isn't it?
Yes, I had to. It's a funny story because Deep River came out when COVID hit, and it didn't sell as well, and it's also a large book. And so I said, "Hell, I'm gonna write a 3-act play for a movie." and so I whipped out a first draft, and my wife, who's my first reader, said, "Oh God, just get over yourself and write a novel." So I wrote a novel, but the second time around I got serious. But the first round. The thing is that I did at least get the outline of the sort of the plot, and then the rest took a lot more work.
I knew very little about Finland at this time in 1947. And so I read voraciously, trying to learn more about it. It's a fascinating time. What brought you there to that time and place, and very specific time?
It was clearly the Ukraine war. I mean, you can see from the dedication.
Yes.
That's on my mind. I don't know what the right word is, embarrassed, appalled at our reaction to the invasion of Crimea in 2014. And as you know, you said I was a Marine, and I have Marine friends who were involved in training, and so I had some connection. And I was just thinking, this is so similar. My own background, my mother's first language was Finnish, and so I know a lot about the what they call the Winter War, which you'd think the Finns won, but they actually didn't. And the reason that they didn't win it is because they got no help from the West. They did it all on their own, and they were overwhelmed by the Soviet Union eventually after an incredibly brave defense, and startled the whole world with how effective they were and what good fighters they were. But they simply couldn't hold out against a neighbor who was, 40 times their size. And they did it all by themselves. And I started thinking, this is so similar, and we're teetering on the edge of doing that again. And so that got me going on the novel and thinking about it. And then the idea of the race came because my uncle was the military attaché to Finland. He's fluent in Finnish. In the late 50s or mid 50s, he was actually involved in a cross-country exercise with a Finnish military academy. And that exercise of a attaché from the Soviet army went along, and they weren't racing, but the Finnish newspapers, because at the time Finland could do nothing, say nothing that would harm the reputation of the Soviet Union. The Red Army was on the borders and completely in control of everything there. So the way that they could get back is that the newspapers, as a sporting event, quote unquote, started seeing it as playing it as, freedom in the West versus totalitarianism. And they had no idea. And my uncle came in quite a ways ahead of this Russian, and he said there were two big black cars waiting at the finish line. He didn't know why, and he quite liked this military attaché. He said he was actually a very decent guy, but that was the last he saw of him. He was gone, and so I thought that's a great story.
One of the things that I found fascinating about the novel, again with some limited knowledge as to what the particular mood was at that time, but what you make so clear is that everyone in the beginning sort of has the best. There's a lot of distrust, but everyone seems to have the best of intentions of the idea of this race, and then the and then the other parties say, "Oh, here's how it can go horribly wrong."
Yeah, yeah. I think that one of the things is this, particularly the figure of Louise, is almost allegorical about American naivete. And I've spent a lot of time overseas and my business, and I was always just amazed at how ignorant Americans are of the rest of the world, and the consequences of things that they do that get away from them. And examples are getting involved in wars in Afghanistan. I mean, it's like, no, I go after Osama bin Laden, absolutely right, but try to sort of recreate a Western society, and you can't do it. But American optimism, we can do it, and by God, we're smart, and we're all those things. But the naivete is our Achilles heel, and hubris, perhaps. So I was thinking about that, and just the small consequences of these two guys who thought they could keep it secret, and the Louise who said, "Yay, rah rah, go get him, Arnie. You'll win the race." And Natalia, who grew up in the Soviet Union under the repression, goes, "No, it doesn't work like that. It does not work like that when you're in a totalitarian society." They could do nothing, and I was playing with the idea of what it was like and how naive Americans are about the privileges we've got. I mean, we're taking them away from ourselves, with all the social media and stuff, but we just have no idea. I mean, I'm constantly amazed at how Americans go overseas and just have no idea of what the two oceans mean and the defense that we have, and our founding documents. I mean, so far so good, but by God, we're getting close, and so I'm that was also a motivator behind the novel. Never write a didactic novel.
Karl Marlantes is our guest. The new novel is Cold Victory. You mentioned Louise being almost allegorical. Let's talk about Louise for a moment. Is a young woman from Oklahoma, comes into this, is married to this military attaché, is without children, wants children, and that really feeds part of this as well. And this is very much in many places her story, her book.
Yeah, she is the sort of the central character. I mean, and of course Natalia, who's her Russian counterpart, is kind of her opposite, and the two of them are clearly friends. They you know how it is. Sometimes you just walk into a party or across a room and you go like, "I like that person." I don't know what that is. I mean, but that happens, and that happens with them. The two men are sort of supply the eventual seed of the disaster that's going to come. We can't do any spoilers here, but yes, indeed, Louise is sort of the central character, because, as I said, I was thinking about American naivete and how that gets us into trouble, and so I focused on her. But Natalia is a very important figure as well. And she sort of does in a way, the more heroic act, which I won't describe.
What is it about the two husbands who take on this race of being aware in many? I mean, they want to keep it quiet, being aware of the dangers, and yet doing it anyway. I mean, there's some hubris there.
Yeah, there is a little bit, and where does accepting a challenge uh, change from the challenge and psychological growth and what's good for your soul, and when does it change to just sort of defying the gods, I think you play with that quite often, and I think men in particular are have to sort of deal with that more often. These are two military guys; they're warriors, and they have honor, and they recognize that in each other, and they also wanted to test themselves. The hubris was that they could get away with it. It wasn't the test of the cross countries, which is brutal. I mean, it's a brutal test. They wanted that challenge, but what they ignored, even after Natalia warned Mikhail, if you lose this race, it's going to be serious. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. We won't get caught. That's the hubris.
And I mean, look, anyone who has read your previous novels knows that you're not a lover of war, but that with that said, there are times you believe that wars need to be fought.
Absolutely. I often tell people I'm not anti-war. I'm just anti-stupid war. And no, absolutely. I mean, like right now in Ukraine, that war needs to be fought. International norms that we've established for 70 years, like violating sovereignty, have been violated. War crimes have been committed. People are talking about, oh well, maybe why don't they just give up a little land? It'll all sort out. We can stop this. They're not giving up land. They're giving up people and freedom. I mean, that war needs to be fought. And I think that we're naive if we don't help them with everything. I mean, I understand the fear of nuclear war, absolutely. But on the other hand, I think that we could have done way more without getting ourselves so close to nuclear war with long-range weapons. Ukraine's a tiny country. The only way that they can probably hit the Russians is where they're weak, which is their logistics. And we never gave them the weapons to do that. They're having to develop them themselves, but it's been years now of their own development, which that means dead Ukrainians and dead Russians. I mean, those Russians that are fighting, they're just mostly kids that are conscripted. I mean, the tragedy is basically a dictatorship where there's no breaks.
So I'm going back to the allegory, and so you look at our naivete in general of the citizens of this country, and a lack of understanding of just how privileged we are to have a rule of law.
Yeah, I have. Where that hit me was I spent some time in Kashmir, and I was staying with a Sikh family, and I had my own family. Somebody came back from the Hajj, and Kashmir is about 96% Muslim, but it's controlled by Hindus and by India. And so there's a lot of unrest, and a riot broke out. I mean, a horrible riot, cars going up in smoke, gasoline bombs, people screaming. And so this friend of mine, a Sikh gentleman, and we put our families under a big heavy table in the middle of the kitchen, which was seemed protected. And we went out on the porch. We had no weapons, but we had big cudgels, big sticks. So we decided if they tried to come into the house, we could at least defend the door that way. And I'm there watching this riot going on, and I turn to my Sikh friend and I say, my God, where are the police? And he turned to me and looked at me like I was from Mars. He said, Karl, the police are Muslims. And I went, oh, it isn't rule of law. Oh my God, they're on the side of somebody. And police have to take no sides. The rule of law has to take no sides. And that was when it hit me how naive I'd been about the rule of law. It's incredibly important, and most people have no idea.
How scared do you think Americans should be of losing it?
I think that we should be very frightened of losing it. I have a quote from Martin Luther King, and I can only paraphrase it, but Martin Luther King said, you're never going to win this war against loss of freedom and basically totalitarianism. He says, every generation must fight it. Every generation. It will never be won. And we need to be fighting it right now, but I don't think we are, not hard enough. And so I'm frightened because if you read your history, Nazi Germany, Italy, Soviet Union, they almost all start off with being voted into office. I mean, Mussolini, Hitler, they were voted in. Pinochet was voted in, and then, oh my God, they get the levers of power, and most people are like, their ox doesn't get gored, so they're just going like, well, how is it going to affect me? I mean, I got to go to work. I'm not interested in politics. I want to just scream at them. You're not interested in politics. This is a republic. That means you must be interested in politics, or else we lose it. And so, no, I'm a little frightened right now, and I'm hopeful that we'll defeat Donald Trump, and a defeat at the polls would be fabulous because at least it would show some American will. A defeat in the legal system is, somewhat satisfying, but I think would not make our foreign friends feel any more secure about, our commitment. And we've looked flaky on commitment. Look what we did with the Kurds. Look what we've done in Afghanistan. I mean, no, we need to do this.
One of the things about I think the King quote that you're referring to talks about the importance of each generation keeping it in check, and
Mm-hmm.
and we. So where did we get off the path there?
Oh, that's a great question. I think we started getting off the path in the Vietnam War when we started to distrust government. I remember being at Yale, 2 o'clock in the morning, 1966 or something like that, and it was after 65. It was Gulf of Tonkin, and everybody's arguing about it, and everybody except me was saying, well, the president's lying about this, and I sputtered. I'm from this logging town in Oregon, but an American president wouldn't lie to Americans, and they all started laughing, and I was like, oh, huh? They think I'm naive. Yeah, I am. And when I tell that story to my kids, they roll their eyes and they go, "What planet are you from, Dad?" I mean, of course they lie. They lie all the time. Uh, okay, well, that's the beginning of it. Reagan capitalized on it. Hello, I'm from the government. I'm here to help. It's a big joke, And so that's the first thing. The second thing is I think that social media obviously is a new thing that we don't know how to handle. Lies all the time, and it's become humdrum. I mean, I can remember CNN, MSNBC when Trump was first in office. He lied about this. This is the 14th lie this week. Now it's just like they don't even report about it anymore. I mean, it's just like it's not even news. So the cynicism is rampant, and the acceptance of it, and that's social media and Fox News, channeled media, where there's no longer a republic has to make decisions on the same data. And when there were the three major networks that had to do news, it was required of them.
Right.
So they were all losses. If you tuned into CBS or NBC or whatever, basically the 5 o'clock news or 6 o'clock news was the same, just a different guy telling you it. Now it's radically different. How can you make decisions if you're operating from a very different base? So that's been a major change, and that was cable news, which started to look for markets. We want our market. That's not news. That's entertainment, and that was the big switch. And then the networks started to go that way too, because it's like, why, God, we've got this newsroom here. It's costing us a fortune. Why don't we start moving it so that we can get more viewers or more readers or whatever? And so all that combination has hit us, and we've just been asleep at the switch. It's just sort of like one little ding after another, and pretty soon you're gone. So, the long answer to the thing is not simple, but it's a whole bunch of stuff. Yeah.
Karl Marlantes is our guest in this week's book show. The name of the new novel is Cold Victory. As far as the historical context of where we were at this time, because it was a really fraught relationship among the Finns, the Americans, and the Soviets and Helsinki at the time. And I learned a lot about that, and I learned a lot about Finland as well. What research went into that for you of questions you had going in?
Yeah, well, there are a couple of things that I think the whole, probably a majority of novelists get one or two little things that hit them and stay with them, and then that sort of starts to generate a novel. Uh, One of the things that I remember, I was very little. I mean, I was probably about 7, and Stalin died. And the headline on the local Astoria paper, the headline was "Uncle Joe Dies." People thought of him in
Mm.
my neck of the woods, which is, a lot of socialists and a lot of, labor union guys. Uncle Joe died. And I thought, holy moly, the way that Americans thought about Joseph Stalin in that time period was very different than the reality. So that was something that hit me. Another thing that hit me was, like I said, this idea that of the Finns fighting this huge neighbor of theirs. I remember asking my grandmother once. I said, "Grandma, what's Sisu?" And she says, "Sisu. That's what beat the Russians in the Winter War." It held off the Russians, but by the time the World War II was over, the Russians had crushed them, and as I said earlier, so those sorts of things funnel into me to sort of make me curious about it. Like I said, my own grandmother's view of that time period was somewhat skewed. So I just started doing my research, and it's fascinating. But what's really fascinating is the reverberations of how similar it is to Ukraine. And as I said, when we started to let Russia get away with, or Putin get away with what he was getting away with, time after time after time, in the Caucasus and the Crimea, and then they, even when he took over the eastern provinces, we just basically ho hummed. Well, we might be ho humming even now. So that all sort of got me thinking, and it is incredibly similar.
I found it really interesting that both Natalia and Mikhail and even the American characters are very aware that Stalin is really just a step away. That they may be far down the food chain, and yet it doesn't take much to get on the radar.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the police state is frightening. Well, why don't the people just brace up against it? Because they will take your children and they will torture them. So, really, you want to take that risk? I mean, look at North Korea. I mean, unbelievable control. And I was trying to explain Sokolov, who is the KGB character,
Mm.
and what pressures are on him to, in effect, maintain that police state. In other words, it pervades everything, and how once it starts, ordinary citizens are going to be cowed. I mean, we like to think, oh, we'd be brave, we'd have a revolution. Are you kidding me? If someone came to you and said, if you step out of line, I'm going to burn your house down, torture your children, rape your wife, and I'm sorry, but you will be tortured for 3 years and sent off to some very cold place, or I'll kill you. How many Americans would actually fight? Not very many. I mean, you can't let it happen. That's
Right.
where the fight has to start.
The other thing you make very clear to help us understand this is that Natalia suffered greatly during the war, and Louise did not. And that was a difference between a Soviet and an American perspective.
Yeah, I think that we have to have some empathy for today's the Russian position, is that their memory of the war was this horrible slaughter. 20 million Russians were killed in the Second World War. We lost 440,000 KIA, something like that, 450,000. Amazing difference. And if talking to my parents about World War II, and my uncles and my father all fought in it, they didn't talk much about the combat, but what they called the war years were looked upon as sort of a moment of greatness, not a moment of horror, because it really wasn't horrible for us. Japanese shelled Fort Stevens, and everybody went down to the beach to watch it. That's
Mm.
that's a little tiny place on the Oregon coast, and I think they also shelled an air base in Southern California, like around Santa Barbara. That was as close as they got. Big oceans, and so our experience is very different. So when you see Russia trying to take Ukraine trying to threaten Poland. They probably want to take it, the Baltics, all the stuff that Stalin took. They need space between them and the West. That's what they think, and they're very paranoid about us. Now, they're wrong. It's like, you can't allow it to happen, but I can understand some of the motivations of it.
Let me ask you a writer question, which is this book, because of the race, it's just good old action fiction. I mean, that's great. Did that come easy to you? I mean, I wouldn't think there would be anything easy about it, but it is, man, it's seamless. It's a really cool part of the book.
Yeah, I have to admit that I figured that out. Someone, I can't remember who it was. He always says that what you want to have is a race against time. For example, the bomb is going to go off at 11 o'clock, and the hero has to solve the problem, and it's 5 to 11, and is he going to get there? That's a sort of a trick of especially sort of commercial fiction writers. It's very good, and so I definitely did conceive that this race would be a kind of a more subtle time bomb, and what's going to happen, what's happening every day, and it keeps you going. And I'm very fortunate that I had a friend from Finland who's a Finnish Marine who is also a ski trooper and knows enormous about the wilderness there and skiing conditions and what you do. And so I pumped him for everything for he was worth, and that also helped that part of the novel. But it actually came pretty easy for me. I mean, I've cross country skied. I mean, I grew up in the woods. I mean, stuff like that is easy for me. I'm also half Finn, so it sort of fit, and I had Finnish contacts, and it was enjoyable. I mean, it's fun to write this kind of a book.
Well, Karl Marlantes' new novel is Cold Victory. It is published by Atlantic Monthly Press. Karl, what a great pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Great questions. I had a good time talking.
Thanks to our producer, Sarah LeDuc. Write to us at book@wamc.org. The latest on National Productions programs is available via the Airwaves newsletter at wamc.org and on social media at WAMC Radio. Bookmark us for next week, and thanks for listening. For The Book Show, I'm Joe Donahue.